And later tonight, there's comedy in A Distinguished Gentleman, starring Eddie Murphy. That's our Saturday movie at 12:20. But first, it's time for the 9 o'clock news with John Finnerty.
David Trimble calls on the SDLP to help consign extremists to the dustbin of history. Charlie McCreevy says next share out of structural funds will go to the poorest regions in Ireland. And Sonia O'Sullivan wins the World Cross Country Championships in Morocco. A very good evening. David Trimble has called on the SDLP to join with his party at the Stormont talks and condemn the extremists to the dustbin of history. Mr. Trimble said as long as Sinn Féin refused to recognise their right to regard themselves as British, unionists couldn't treat them as a democratic party. Meanwhile, Sinn Féin has decided to return to the Stormont talks on Monday. Party chairman Mitchell McLaughlin said progress was possible at the talks if there was a common approach by the Irish government, Sinn Féin and the SDLP.
David Trimble's view is that the Stormont talks can produce agreement, but not one that Sinn Féin could accept. Any settlement, he said, would maintain the union and couldn't include any body that resembled an embryonic all-Ireland government. However, he told his party that unionist proposals so far had involved principled compromise, but the loudest applause came when he spelt out the limits of the talks for those he represented.
But some people are greedy. They expect unionists to cower under pressure or threats of violence and concede more. And I have to say to the greedy ones that this party entered negotiations to reach a political settlement with constitutional parties. It did not enter into it to buy peace at any price. The real question that commentators should be asking is whether the SDLP will have the courage to move forward, to take up this opportunity, and to leave the extremists to the dustbin of history. I hope they will.
Earlier this week, Bill Clinton urged the Ulster Unionist leader to engage with Sinn Féin, but David Trimble said that party could not be viewed as truly democratic as long as it didn't accept Northern Ireland's right to decide its own future. Again, he said the real engagement must come not with Gerry Adams, but with the SDLP.
Now, to get agreement, we need the SDLP to engage meaningfully with us. And I say to them, the days of relying on the Irish government to do your negotiating are over. We want to reach agreement in the talks. To do that means settling our differences.
Mr. Trimble gave little away in this speech, but it's clear that he's now seeking to turn the political pressure on the SDLP and its leader, John Hume. Agreement is possible in the talks, says David Trimble, but only if the SDLP breaks with Sinn Féin. But as Sinn Féin's Ard Comhairle met in Dublin, the message was that nationalists must stand together in the talks if there's to be a settlement.
Sinn Féin has put forward our proposition. We've also developed in a recent document, the Bridge into the Future paper, what we believe is a common expectation amongst nationalism as opposed to our own specific constituency of republicanism. And I think people recognise that these are reasonable, legitimate and achievable positions which, if we have a common approach, and that is one led by the Irish government, supported by the SDLP and ourselves, then I think we can achieve a significant measure of agreement.
As expected, the party's ruling body decided to return to Stormont on Monday. Its 2-week suspension expired last week, but Sinn Féin had delayed making a final decision until today. David Davenpower, RTÉ News, Belfast.
Despite the ongoing search to find a political agreement, there's still much tension between the communities as attacks on people and property continue. A Catholic family in Larne was forced to move out of its home after it was badly damaged in an arson attack during the early hours of this morning. The Ulster Unionist Lord Mayor of Larne described the attack as pure sectarianism.
The McCurry family, who are Catholics, have lived in the Bel Air estate, which is a mixed area, for many years. At about 3:30 this morning, a piece of concrete smashed through the living room window. A flammable liquid was poured in and set alight. 18-year-old Donna McCurry, who was lying on the sofa, suffered burns to her right leg. 3 others, including her 4-month-old child Chloe, were asleep upstairs. The family are in a state of shock.
Well, what can I say? I wouldn't like anybody's only be like mine. And I wouldn't want anybody this to happen to anybody. It's attempted murder, that's what it is. They tried to kill us in our bed.
The living room was completely gutted. The rest of the house suffered smoke damage. The Ulster Unionist Mayor of Larne was one of the first to offer her sympathies.
This is obviously a sectarian attack, and I'd be very perturbed, and I would hope that the people of Craigie would be united in condemning this.
Today, the McCarry family packed their belongings. They are leaving. Happier times have been forgotten as they wait to be rehoused. Such sectarian attacks have become commonplace. Last night in the Seacourt estate on the other side of the town, this flat was set alight. Its occupier, a Protestant woman, was away. Michael O'Kane, RTÉ News, Belfast.
The Minister for Finance, Charlie McCreevy, says the greatest proportion of Ireland's next share out of structural funds will be given to the poorest regions of the country. He was speaking in York, where EU finance ministers discussed plans to reform the structural funds and farm grants after 1999.
EU finance ministers got a rowdy reception as they gathered for their discussions in York. Hundreds of protesters anxious to keep Britain out of monetary union yelled abuse at the different delegations. While the demonstrations continued outside, the ministers discussed the proposed reforms of structural funds and farm aid programmes published last Wednesday by the European Commission. Charlie McCreevy today made it plain that Ireland won't accept the planned changes in the Common Agricultural Policy.
We reject the proposals which came out of the Commission last week and are not acceptable to Ireland, and will be opposing them.
The Minister accepts Ireland's share of structural funds will fall significantly, but in a promise that will please interest groups in the West, the Midlands and the border counties, he said the less well-off regions will receive priority next time.
It will be the job of this particular government, when the finality of the funds are decided upon, to ensure that the less well-off regions of the country are going to benefit proportionally more. There is no point in having just one area of the country, or some little areas of the country, doing exceptionally well, and the rest of the country being denuded of population, infrastructure and all of the social services.
From today's preliminary discussions, it's very clear that at European level over the next 12 months, there's going to be quite a lot of arguing over who gets what from the reduced structural funds. And from Charlie McCreevy's comments, it's obvious the government expects the very same kind of row in Ireland. Tommy Gorman, RTÉ News, York.
Gardaí have released a man they were questioning following a fatal stabbing in Dublin this morning. A file is being prepared for the Director of Public Prosecutions. The 37-year-old victim died at the Mater Hospital, having sustained injuries in a row in Stoneybatter. He was named this evening as Michael Murphy of Cooltree Drive in Ballymun. Pope John Paul, who's on a 3-day visit to Nigeria, has called for respect for human rights and the promotion of justice. The Pope urged Nigerians to take up what he described as the difficult and urgent task of building a society which respects the dignity, rights and freedom of all. The main purpose of the Pontiff's visit, his second to Nigeria, is the beatification of the monk Cyprian Tanzi, who died in 1964.
Dear Nigerian friends.
Now the full roundup of the day's sport. Here's Colm Murray.
Thanks, John. Well, we begin with athletics. The President has led a nation's tributes and rejoicings as Sonia O'Sullivan came out of hibernation way down under in glorious style today. At the World Cross Country Championships in Morocco, she made winning look oh so easy in the 8,000 metres event.
Having been training in Australia, the heat of Marrakesh proved no obstacle for Cove's Sonia O'Sullivan as she ran a comfortable race from the start, with, she said, just a few difficult moments throughout. Sonia kept just a little clear of the race traffic from the outset, followed closely by the pre-race favourites, the Kenyans. Britain's Paula Radcliffe also kept steady pace at the front. But the drama of this championship came in a sprint finish between O'Sullivan and Radcliffe. As the finish line approached, Sonia had to look around for course directions, poor stewarding almost costing her time. But she strode away from Radcliffe, creating a 5-metre gap at the end. Her finish time, 25 minutes and 39 seconds. Sonia becomes the first Irish woman and just the third Irish person to take a World Cross Country title, and the joy and relief was apparent.
Yeah, it was unbelievable, you know. It was like I went away and hibernated for a while and stored up lots of things and energy and everything inside me, and I can't believe it, you know. I mean, I suppose I knew I was fit and I knew I was ready, but at the same time nothing's guaranteed.
Obviously delighted, she said a cross-country victory was a long-time ambition.
I always wanted to win this race, you know. I think this is where I started, 1987, when I won the junior and senior in Ireland, and I could have ran the World Cross Country that year, but they told me it was too tough for me. So, yeah, I'm glad I waited till here, because it's great down here, and, you know, good weather for me.
The smiles on the winning podium said it all for Sonia. Paula Radcliffe had to be content with second place for the second year in a row, with Ethiopian Gita Wami, the 1996 winner, coming in third. Annette O'Donnell, RTÉ News.
Yes, well done indeed to Sonia. As we move on to rugby, and after that brave performance in the Stade de France 2 weeks ago, Irish hopes were very high indeed as Warren Gatland's Chargers played host to Wales at Lansdowne Road this afternoon. After Ireland's courageous performance in Paris a fortnight ago, President McAleese was on hand at Lansdowne Road this afternoon to see Warren Gatland's Chargers take on our nearest Gaelic rivals before a capacity crowd. And in the early stages, she must have been delighted as Ballynahinch's Andy Ward capitalised on Ireland's early superiority for an opening try. 10 minutes later, however, Neil Jenkins put Wales on the map with this penalty kick. However, Ireland replied emphatically when Victor Costello at last realised his huge potential for this impressive try, which Elwood converted. But almost immediately, Wales bounced back. Jenkins again the key man with a Gary Owen, as Alan Bateman profited from a very lucky bounce, which Jenkins went on to convert. Ireland enjoyed a 2-point lead at the start of the second half as Wales piled on huge pressure, which eventually saw Kevin Morgan going over for his second ever try, Jenkins again converting. Later, the undoubted Welsh man of the match weaved his way through the Irish defence for a brilliant try himself. Then it was effectively all over. Predictably, he converted to give the gallant visitors a 9-point victory.
In Paris, the guys did the basics really well, and today their basics let us down, and at the end of the day we just weren't good enough to beat Wales, and they fully deserved their win.
And now for a check on the final result. Ireland 21 points, Wales 30. In racing, after those heady days of Cheltenham, there was a huge Irish win in the big race of the day, the Midlands Grand National at Uttoxeter today, when Jessica Harrington 6-1 shot Miss Orchestra romped home in the hands of young Irish jockey Barry Geraghty.
One left to jump in the Midlands National, and Miss Orchestra about 6 in front, draws towards it now. She jumps it well. She's outstaying them in the run to the line. She's about 6 or 8 lengths in front. Kamikaze battling on, then down Samurai. But in the run up to the line, it's Miss Orchestra who's going to go on and score in the Midlands National by 6 or 7 lengths. Kamikaze is second, another excuse in third.
In golf, Peter Mitchell leads at 15 under par going into the final round of the Portuguese Open. Ireland's Darren Clarke overcame his stomach bug to shoot a 4 under par 69. He's 5 strokes off the pace at 10 under. Raymond Burns shot a 68 to move up to 6 under, while Des Smith had to settle for a 74 and is 4 under. In snooker, Ireland's Fergal O'Brien has come through the final qualifying round of the World Championships. The Dubliner won his game against England's Joe Perry by 10 frames to 7. Northern Ireland's Joe Swale also won his game by 10 frames to 3.
On our This Week programme on Radio 1 at 1 o'clock tomorrow, as David Trimble says he has nothing to talk to Sinn Féin about, Gerry Adams outlines his party's hopes as it returns to the talks table. Well, that's the news this Saturday night from Colm and from me. A very good evening to you.
Good evening. Another very quiet day with high pressure sitting close by Ireland. In fact, at the moment the centre of the high is just to the northeast and we've little or no wind. Remember, winds flowing out from the centre of a high pressure and circulating slightly in a clockwise direction around that high pressure. At the moment those winds force 3 or less. Now it's absolutely ideal conditions to check on your barometric reading. It's about 1038 hectopascals, or millibars as it used to be known. That's about 30.5 inches of mercury, and really the pressure pretty steady for the rest of this evening. Now, very little happening in the weather for the rest of this evening and tonight. Most areas staying dry and fine. Quite cloudy still in parts of the east and south, and this will prevent temperatures from falling too low. But under clear skies now, turning pretty chilly once again. Air temperatures down to 1 or 0 with some fog and frost developing. But this will clear off quickly in the morning to give another generally fine, dry day. Some good sunny spells likely, especially up to the west and northwest, though in some areas now still staying a little on the dull and cloudy side. The cloud most likely over Munster and southern parts of Leinster. And indeed temperatures tomorrow totally dependent on the cloud, though everywhere feeling rather pleasant. Temperatures in the cloudier spots around 11 degrees Celsius and in the sunshine up to 14 or even 15 degrees Celsius. As I said, feeling pretty pleasant due to these above normal temperatures and also due to the fact that the winds tomorrow once again will be very slack with high pressure very close by in sea areas, force 4 at maximum along the west coast. So absolutely ideal sea conditions and indeed for any sea crossings tomorrow. The sea's almost glassy right around our shores. Now, it looks like the winds will be freshening during Monday as an Atlantic front begins to push in from the west, eventually bringing some outbreaks of rain into the west and northwest. But for most of Ireland, it will be fine for daylight hours on Monday. But for details on next week's weather, join me here tomorrow for the farming forecast at 1 p.m. In the meanwhile now, I'll leave you with a summary for tomorrow's weather. Good night.
Call and see who's up out of bed.
Surprise guests, music and chat. That's Kenny Live in a few minutes' time.